Welcome, listeners, to Snippit Sports Science Podcast, sponsored by EliteForm.com. This is Jared Coleman-Starr, today with the first author of the article, Relationship Between Pregame Concentrations of Free Testosterone and Outcome in Rugby Union. First author of this article is Christopher M. Gaviglio. Welcome to Snippit Sports Science, Chris.
Thanks, Jared.
How are you?
I'm very well, and yourself?
Pretty well. Can you tell us a bit about this article that you wrote?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, it was quite interesting that when we were talking about getting first authors, I said, well, I've actually got a couple to contribute to the actual podcast itself. And this one here is part of my thesis. So part one of 4 papers we could talk about. And there's actually some other really cool papers which never got published, which we could go into a little bit more detail at another time if you want.
Right, absolutely. So is this one of the first articles that you've published? And we'll kind of go through them in semi-chronological sequence.
Yeah, definitely. It'd be a cool little journey for everyone. What this article focuses on is looking at the role of testosterone and competition outcome. To put this in a little bit of perspective, although when you read this paper, it just focuses on 6 weeks of data, this is actually 2 years of sampling in the making. So in the first year, we actually did some pilot work and found a lot of really interesting information out there. And this was actually year 2, so we actually refined our processes a little bit more leading into the second year of sampling, and that's the paper that you're actually reading right now. So when you look at testosterone, from a physical point of view, it correlates really well to strength, speed, and power. We all know that, and we've actually spoken about this in previous episodes. The other area which has little attention, but I think has much more power, is around mood states such as aggression, determination, and competitiveness.
So is this data from when you were with Bath Rugby?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay.
When you look at historically, there is a little bit of information about pre-levels of testosterone and outcome in competition, but more data actually comes around the pre to post change across the session. When you look at historically at other research out there, the rise, if you have a positive rise in testosterone, that's more so associated with winners. So obviously you win a competition, you feel quite euphoric, you feel quite good about yourself, your testosterone will rise. Conversely, in losers, you tend to actually find that decrement of testosterone from pre to post competition as well.
Right, increases in testosterone, win wars, and win games.
Definitely right. And also if you win, you tend to get a rise in testosterone. The likelihood of wanting to compete again and being successful at that tends to be in those warriors or those competitors who actually have that positive rise from pre to post competition.
It reminds me of another article. I don't know if this is one of your articles or one of Christian Cook's, but when the loser has an increase in testosterone, they're also more likely to want to re-challenge.
However, if they attribute that to luck, they'll tend to not be as successful the next time around.
Interesting. So you need sort of an internal locus of control. You still need to feel in control.
Yeah, you need to believe that you won that on your own merit.
Makes sense. Tell me a little bit about how the study was conducted. What subjects did you use?
The athletes, as you alluded to, was at Bath Rugby. This was an elite team. At any given time, we're actually one of the best teams in Europe and really relevant to the use of testosterone and cortisol in terms of a marker. Rugby is an aggressive-based sport. Lots of strength, a lot of speed required in the sport with lots of contact. So, we thought these are really good markers to use. What we did with the athletes, we actually sampled 40 minutes or so before the kick-off of the game. It was quite a short turnaround. They'd sample for us, and as soon as they came off the field, within probably about 2 to 3 minutes, they would actually sample again. So we're quite fortunate to actually get quite acute measures as opposed to waiting until after the game where you might actually see, although they may have acutely risen from the game, they might have had a transient decline as they've just sat and rested.
This study was conducted over a 6-week period over the middle of a season, including the training that was happening during that competitive season.
Definitely. We also collected other data such as how did the coach rate the performance, such as bad, average, or very good. We also looked at historical data, like how well we had actually played against previous teams. So we actually had some local derbies. I think that was important to take that into account. And also the home and away factor as well. Traditionally, when you look at historic data, games played at home, you'll traditionally have higher levels of testosterone concentrations. And also people, if you would play away in someone else's territory, you tend to have lower levels of testosterone. And that comes around that whole thing about protecting your own territory.
Right. I think that word territory explains it quite well, as we are territorial creatures at the end of the day. And similarly, we'll do more to defend our own home than we would to invade someone else's.
Yeah. Another marker we actually looked at was the TC ratio, the testosterone-to-cortisol ratio. Traditionally, when this marker was first proposed, they actually looked at it as a marker of response to a session. So is an athlete overtrained or undertrained? There was, as I started doing these articles, there was actually a little bit about possibly correlating this with winning as well. And so we thought it was actually worthwhile to look into that as well. If we have a positive rise in TC ratio, that could be an anabolic type response, and conversely, a decline, more indicative of that catabolic type decline.
Right. And the way I think about it now is to think of testosterone and cortisol both as stress hormones. So I actually consider testosterone to be a stress hormone. But whereas cortisol is sort of your master stress hormone, where you look at how much stress a person has, the testosterone gives you a little bit of inference on will they choose fight of that fight or flight response rather than to flight. So what did you find?
Our major finding is that the higher levels of pre-game testosterone, we would win, which I think was a really nice outcome for us. As I mentioned earlier, traditionally, not a lot of papers have actually seen pre-game T in rugby union players to be, you're going to win. I think that was quite good. As I said earlier, we actually found this over 2 years worth of data, 2 6-week subsets of data, which is quite nice to actually know that our data is quite consistent.
Yeah, it would have been great if you had the opposition's testosterone as well, and you could have seen if your team has more testosterone than their team, if that's the deciding factor.
Oh, definitely, and imagine if you could have that data real time.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. You know what they've got I think it's the Stanford University football stadium. Is they've actually got infrared cameras set up all around the whole stadium, and they watch the heat to determine heat stress on the opposition's players, and then they actually specifically target the extra heat stressed players.
Is that right? And is there an outcome from that?
Oh, yeah, they win games.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Something really simple.
Yeah.
At the
moment, I've never mentioned that to you before, have I? That's pretty cool, isn't it?
That's very cool. Yeah, definitely. It goes right down your alley in the heat.
Of course.
The other one was the game ranked performance score that the coaches actually gained was related to pre-game testosterone. So if the coaches thought that we played well, that actually correlated quite well to testosterone.
So it was a little that pre-game testosterone that was having these effects, not necessarily the change in the testosterone over the game.
Well, I wouldn't say is the pre-game testosterone having the effect, or rather is it a good biomarker?
Well, of course, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty important to establish here that although we see that the effects, or although that we know that if you have higher concentrations of testosterone, you're more likely to perform better in physical and also motivational type behaviours, but rather is it just a marker? And I think that's really important to try to distinguish. And my thinking has actually developed as it's a really great marker. And I think we need to be quite careful to say, we increase testosterone, I'm going to run faster. But rather, it's just indicative.
Excellent point. There have been some interventional studies where the testosterone is increased by various different strategies. And then we have seen a reflection in performance changes from those interventions as well, haven't we?
Definitely.
Right. Although, of course, that could just be a third variable rather than an actual causative effect.
And one of the other minor points was that home and away had no effect on either testosterone or cortisol. Part of my thought behind that was that you had a team that was very confident in their own performance. You hear a lot about teams that when they're performing well, they could have the worst travel plan in the world and they'll still perform well because they're just confident in their own performance.
Makes sense. So what sort of conclusions do you draw from that data?
The major conclusion is that this is a really good marker of readiness. It actually shows that if you're able to find ways of enhancing pre-game concentrations of testosterone, you're more likely to improve the readiness of the athlete.
So we previously discussed that daily readiness quite a bit with the velocity-based training. Is there any sort of association there that we can look at between velocity and testosterone?
Potentially we could. As I mentioned earlier, testosterone has been shown to correlate really well with measures of power and speed and strength. What I will go into in another podcast is the actual specificity of the type of movement. And I think that's quite important as well. So if we're looking at velocity, say we're looking at, for example, a jump or a vertical jump, is that relevant to the cohort of athletes that you're working with? There's actually some work out there where they say, vertical jump's a great marker of readiness for athletes. However, if athletes don't jump a lot in their actual sport, so in my opinion, rugby union athletes don't jump a lot. The second rowers who are in the line-out, they'll actually get pushed up by other people, and the people on the wings, they'll rarely ever jump. You've got a lot of athletes who actually have issues with a lot of joints. A lot of the front row forwards have bad knees, bad ankles, bad hips and backs. So for them to get them to perform maximally in a vertical jump type scenario, where a vertical jump is not specific to the sport at all, that actually may not show the level of readiness that you want them to. And you actually ask them to do something very physical where they have to be aroused prior to the actual competition, whereas prior to the event, you want probably something a little bit more non-invasive and non-physical to actually get an indication of where they could be at.
That's an excellent point. Stay tuned for more on that, listeners. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Jared.
This has been Snippit Sports Science Podcast, sponsored by eliteform.com. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram and visit our website at snippetscience.com. Thank you.